Greetings. Over the past year, as we have been entrenched in this lineage-based fight for reparations here in California, I've thought about something our brother Monty, known as Him Again on social media, told us back in 2011. Monty blew us away when he said, the previous 30 generations, it took over 1 billion people to create us, meaning the generation before us, we each have 2 biological parents. 2 generations before us, we each have 4 biological grandparents. 3 generations before us, we each have 8 biological great-grandparents. 4 generations before us, we have 16 biological great-great-grandparents. 5 generations before us, we have 32 biological foreparents or ancestors who it took to create us. And when we go all the way back 30 generations, there were 1,073,741,824 biological foreparents or ancestors who it took to create us. In some of those relations, we know there were interracial relationships that went into creating us, which draws our lineage into different directions. We also know there was the potential for ancestral relations, meaning parent and child, siblings, and even cousins, which will have some of these numbers adjusted through the different generations when that occurred. So in relation to our fight for lineage-based reparations, first I want to look at the number of generations post-emancipation. For me, that's about 5 generations. The first generation with 2 parents, second generation, 4 grandparents, third generation, 8 great-grandparents, fourth generation, 16 great-great-grandparents, and fifth generation back, 32 foreparents. In total, that's about 62 foreparents I've had since the emancipation of slavery. Now, in my case specifically, I know around the 4th generation back on my father's side of the family, I have a great-great-grandmother who was raped by what we believe was an Italian man. And on my mom's side, I have a great-great-grandmother who was white and had a daughter with a black man. So of the 16 great-great-grandparents, 1 on both sides was white. So that's 2 out of 16, meaning I'm 1/8 a descendant of white people. The other 7/8 of my ancestors were a combination of both black people who were indigenous to what we now call the Americas and ancestors who were kidnapped from Africa and put into the transatlantic slave trade and brought here to America. Lastly, I want to look at the potential number of generations and of our foreparents who experienced U.S. chattel slavery. There are a number of scholars who suggest U.S. chattel slavery lasted at least 12 generations. I will look starting from the 5th generation before me. I had included them in the post-emancipation generations, but because we do not have birth records for all 32 of those foreparents in the 5th generation before me, I know some of them potentially were born in slavery and may have experienced slavery. So from the 5th previous generation before me to the 17th previous generation before me, there were 262,112 people who went into the creation of me. And again, at least 1/8 of that number was Caucasian. That would leave potentially close to 230 some thousand of my ancestors who experienced U.S. chattel slavery. So when we look at numbers like this and we talk about reparations, we know we would be in a much better position today had all of those ancestors received payment for their labor. In addition, that's not counting how many siblings all of these ancestors had and the potential wealth those families could have accumulated. So when we talk about reparations that are owed to us, it's much more than an apology. There has been study after study, way more thorough than what I just presented. So we don't need any more studies. Cut the check.
Everyone has two parents, a mother and a father, and you honor your parents, but you also have grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, great-great-great-great-grandparents. So you don't dismiss your other ancestors and focus only on your parents or those family members that you know. A wise person would avail themselves of all the ancestral knowledge that is a part of their DNA. That's wisdom, right? And so let me just share a couple of other things with your listeners that would encourage them to want to know more about their African selves. At the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., where I live, there's an exhibit in the David Koch Hall of Human Origins. And I'm going to give you a couple of takeaways from that exhibit. It says 200,000 years ago, Africans were the only human beings on the planet. Now, this exhibition is a bit dated, and this number has been revised, and it's now 300,000 years ago. Africans were the only Homo sapiens sapiens on the planet. It goes on to say that 65,000 years ago, Africans in East Africa, Northeast Africa, walked out of Africa into Asia and populated Asia. And then 40,000 years ago, another group of these same Africans walked out of Northeast Africa and populated Western Asia, the landmass that we now call Europe. What this basic information means that the first human beings in Asia were African. The first human beings in Europe were African. So the world was populated by African people, which means on a very basic and fundamental level that there is no such thing as race. Race is a false construct that was created by races in order to divide humanity by color. There's only one race, as John Jackson says in the Introduction to African Civilization. There's only one race, the human race, which had its origins in Africa. But as Africans moved to various parts of the world, and over a period of tens of thousands of years, they adapted to their environment, and through the process of speciation, they became the so-called races that now populate the planet. But in every single person on this planet, they still retain the mitochondrial DNA, that DNA that was passed along by our mothers. That DNA has been traced back to a group of women who are still living in Africa today. This is important information. It's empowering information. And when you understand that African historical, cultural, and genetic memory goes back at least 300,000 years, it's important. It's valuable to me. Another important caveat is that about 15 years ago, geneticists identified when African genes in Europe mutated and Africans became the people now classified as Caucasians. That mutation occurred 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. All right? Put a pin in that for a minute. So if African people have been on the planet for 300,000 years, and the people who have controlled the world for the last 2,000 years have only been here for 8,000 years, it means that people of African ancestry have a 292,000-year head start. Shouldn't you want to know more about what was happening before our world was turned upside down? It just makes good common sense.